Welcome, everybody, to our kickoff SLPS, our Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series. Central Community College is so glad you have decided to join us for our season kickoff. We also are very, very excited that UNL Environmental Studies is joining Central Community College, Joslin Institute for Sustainable Communities, Metropolitan Community College, and Waste Cap, Nebraska. In our regional effort, educational effort to empower leaders for a sustainable future. This presentation is set up so you can ask questions. You have three options to get your questions to the speakers today. If you're not connected to WebEx, you can put it directly in the chat box and we'll get them answered during our Q&A at the end of the event. You can give, if you're in a room, a live viewing room across the state of Nebraska, you can give it to the room attendant on that site to put in the chat box, and they will get your questions to us. You can also ask questions with Twitter using the hashtag SLPSThursday. And with that, we're very excited to get started. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Kathleen Smith and Brad Liljequist. Kathleen Smith is a lead fellow and the technical director of the International Living Future Institute. She is an architect by training with over 25 years of experience in sustainable design, construction, and education. Kathleen has worked on dozens of high-performance buildings in the commercial, residential, healthcare, and institutional sectors. She has also worked with various institutions to develop policies, programs, and trainings to establish, measure, and document sustainability goals and performance. She is the co-author of two books, Rebuilding Community in America and the Northwest Green Home Primer. We're very, very excited. I've been working with Kathleen personally over the last several weeks, and I could not be more excited to have her share her expertise with all the SLPS partners and as we get going on our net zero project at Central Community College. They are presenting live from Seattle, Washington, so they're very lucky. Some of our other speakers are presenting during the nighttime, but they're wide awake and ready to go. So, Brad Liljequist, he is the Net Zero Energy Buildings and Living Community Challenge Technical Director at the International Living Future Institute. As the director of the Institute's Net Zero Energy and Living Community programs, Brad is at the forefront of a global transformation toward a carbon-free future. And at PCC, as a ACU PCC signatory, we're very glad to hear that, Brad. He directed development of the Pedal and Net Zero Energy Certified Z-Home, if I'm saying that right, the first multifamily zero net energy community in the United States, as well as the Issaquah Fire Station 72, which he's noted is the world's most energy efficient fire station and recipient of the International 2012 ASHRAE Technology Award. That has nearly 3 decades of experience catalyzing change in the field of planning, environmental policy, urban design, construction, management, and sustainable design. And so with that, I'm going to hand off the presentation to Kathleen and Brad to get us going on this very, very exciting kickoff. And with that, just in a moment, Kathleen, you should have screen sharing privileges, and it'll be all yours.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Minetta, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to all of the SLPS partners. Brad and I are both thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you today and to also work with you in person in a couple of weeks at the Hastings campus. So thanks very much for the invitation. We today, Brad and I, are going to be tag teaming on a presentation to introduce you to a program called the Living Building Challenge. And this is a program of the International Living Future Institute. That is the nonprofit organization that Brad and I both work for. And the mission of ILFI is to lead and support the transformation toward communities that are socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. So it's taking a comprehensive view towards sustainability that deals with social issues, economic issues, issues of equity and inclusion, as well as traditional environmental issues. So this is the International Living Future Institute. And it operates a number of programs, including the Living Building Challenge, which is the one that we are going to be talking with you about today. And in essence, the Living Building Challenge is a certification program. It is a framework to guide people in the design and construction of buildings, renovations, landscapes, to create sort of truly sustainable buildings. But it is really much more than a certification program. It is at its core a philosophy which embodies a vision of a living future, a vision of how we can rethink the way we approach buildings and construction and cities and the way we live and work and play in our built environments, and rethink that approach to one that is socially just, ecologically restorative, and culturally rich. So it is embedded in the philosophy. It becomes a certification program so that it's actionable. And in between that, it is also an advocacy tool. We acknowledge that on this road towards a sustainable community, a sustainable building, a sustainable future, we're going to run into roadblocks. And we need tools and resources and methods of working together to help overcome those hurdles and overcome those roadblocks. So to explain the philosophy of this program more, we often use the metaphor of a flower. So if you think about a flower is deeply rooted in its place. It is adapted to the climate, adapted to the site, native to that place where it is. It is able to get everything it needs to survive and thrive from its environment. So it's harvesting all the energy and water and nutrients that it needs from the sun, from the air, from the soil. It operates completely pollution-free. It's part of an integrated ecosystem, and it's beautiful. And so we ask the question of, what if we could describe buildings the same way as we describe a flower, so that buildings also are deeply rooted in place, harvest all their own energy and water, operate pollution-free, are healthy places to be, are part of an ecosystem and part of a community infrastructure, as well as being beautiful, inspiring, and educational places. So another way to think about this is that, people for a long time have been talking about green design, sustainable design, environmental design, about stewardship of place, but often the programs and policies that are developed focus very much on doing less bad. And the problem with that is that's based in this assumption that we as humans are separate from nature, and no matter what we do, we're going to screw up. And so let's just try and screw up less. But we sort of turn that on its head and, posit that actually we as humans are an integral part of the environments with which we live. So the built environment, the natural environment, and that we have the capacity to be a part of nature, be a part of our environments in a way that's beneficial, that gives back, that provides benefits to all species. And so the Living Building Challenge is really focused on this positive vision moving forward, and really asking the question of not how do we do less bad, but actually what does good look like? So that's a really fundamental question. This program asks the question, what does good look like? And then designs a pathway for how we get there. So the program itself is organized into 7 different categories, which we call petals. These are place, so dealing with site issues, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. And within these 7 categories, there are 20 different imperatives. So the imperatives are the set of requirements that need to be met in order to, fulfill the imperative and fulfill the petal. And so today we're going to be walking through each of these 7 petals and very briefly through each of these imperatives. We're really giving you a taste of the program and the types of concepts and strategies that are at play. And we're looking forward to the opportunity when we come there in a couple of weeks to digging into all of this in much more detail around a real project happening on the Hastings campus. So an important concept to understand is this idea of transect, and it's really the idea of place, and acknowledging that there are a lot of different types of communities, a lot of different types of environments, and where we build, whether it's in a rural community or in a suburb or in a dense urban environment, makes a difference in terms of what some of the requirements are and what some of our approaches to design would be. So in our program as well, there's 3 pathways to certification. One is full Living Building Challenge certification, and ideally that's always the goal, but realistically that's not always the case. Full certification requires that you have completed all 20 imperatives in all 7 petals. Petal certification is sort of giving credit when someone is able to really push and make great strides on some of the petals, but not all of them. And the requirement there is that you have to do 3 petals at minimum, and one of those 3 has to be either water, energy, or materials. So we often say that those are the 3 toughest petals. So you have to do one of the tough ones plus 2 others. And then we also have a 3rd pathway to certification, which is called Net Zero Energy Building Certification. And Brad is the manager of that program as well as other duties within the Institute. And the idea there is really an acknowledgement that climate change is a very serious, real issue, and that our built environment has a very real impact on climate. And so it is giving credit and acknowledgement to projects that really push in that arena. An important aspect of our program is that it is based on actual performance. So some green building certification programs are based on modeled performance. So they look at how is the building designed to operate. And you can get certified on kind of day 1 of occupancy, you know, when you first move into that building if it's a new building. But our program actually requires a 12-month performance period, which is 12 months of full occupancy, full use of the building, so that you can see over time and through all the cycles of a year that the building is actually performing the way that you want it to, and you've met those different performance requirements. So this is a program that was launched about probably 6-7 years ago now and has been growing rapidly over time. The thing I love about this slide is that it's constantly out of date. No matter how often we update it, it gets out of date very quickly because really literally every day we have more projects registering to use the program and projects really around the globe. Obviously you can see that there's an emphasis of more projects within the United States, but really there are projects moving forward on every continent around the world. This is sort of a focused look at the United States. The size of the dot is indicating the number of projects that are using the Living Building Challenge program, and you can see there Nebraska right in the middle, and your campus, your project on the Hastings campus is going to be the first registered project and hopefully the first certified project, but there are many others within the central United States. Here you get a little closer look at that. So now we're going to move into the petals. I'm going to hand it off to Brad. He's going to present the first 4 petals, and then I will pick it back up with the 5th petal.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here with you. Again, my name is Brad Liljequist, and we're going to kick things off and talk a little bit about the place petal, the first petal of the 7 petals in the Living Building Challenge. And there are 4 imperatives, i.e. kind of 4 requirement areas that apply to the place petal. So we're just going to discuss each of these briefly. So the first petal, and there's a lot of nuance to this, so which I'm not going to go into, but just at a high level, the first imperative is really focused on making sure that development is happening in the right place. What we're wanting to avoid is development in total greenfield locations that haven't been previously developed or aren't surrounded by existing development or aren't part of an urban growth area, part of a growth management plan. And then we also have some requirements on this imperative related to how the site is landscaped, and the focus on that part of the imperative is on really trying to emulate the natural landscape of the biosystem of the locality. Just kind of a high-level provocative thing, and we have a few of these slides interspersed throughout the webinar just to get folks thinking. And this is just to do, this slide has to do with density and density of cities. This is a slide showing both the kind of the land coverage of Atlanta and the land coverage of Barcelona in Spain. Two cities that have almost the exact same population. Obviously Atlanta is taking up much more space, and so really when you think about density, there's a lot to that, but a big part of that conversation is, you know, how much area are we setting aside for ourselves as humans, and how much are we setting aside for natural spaces, for agriculture, etc. Regarding landscaping, I was talking about creating a landscape that is emulates kind of the original indigenous ecosystem. You know, if you think about why you might do that, if you're emulating the natural state of the site, that's providing avian, bird habitat, wildlife habitat. And it's important to note that that's not just about using native plants, and I think as you all are really aware, I mean, you have this kind of amazing legacy of the Great Plains, and in, you know, a few very special spots, there's some residual, you know, places where the original plains are still in place, and that has to do with a lot. It's plants, it's the soil, it's kind of the whole ecosystem of the soil profile. So doing as much as we can with landscaping to emulate that is what we're looking for there. Our second imperative is about urban agriculture, and it's interesting, you guys are obviously in Nebraska in a very agriculturally oriented state, so we recognize, you know, this varies a lot depending on where you are in the world, but the focus on this imperative is that an individual project have some amount of agricultural within the project itself. And the requirement is that more agriculture be provided at lower density. So the higher density you get, the less you're required to provide. So why would we do this? I mean, it may seem a little bit unusual in a place like Nebraska where you already have a lot of farmland, but looked at in aggregate, I think you can really appreciate some of the things that are behind this requirement. You know, having a connection to the land, providing just kind of a diversity of what's going on in place, letting people get their hands a little dirty, maybe just with a small plot of land where you're doing some growing in conjunction with other things going on site. And it also just provides a great connection with nature, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. The third imperative is our habitat exchange imperative, and so this requirement is that for each area that you develop, that an equal amount of space that is an equal amount of space that's developed, that there also be a set aside through an existing land trust to set aside an equal amount of land for wildlands. This does seem like a heavy-duty requirement in terms of, wow, if I'm, say, developing an acre, I need to find a set-aside somewhere else of an acre. What we find is a lot of these set-asides are in places like places where there's jungle or there's native rainforest, those sorts of things, and the costs are actually quite reasonable, but the beneficial impact is quite high in terms of what's being preserved. And you even think about natural connections between Nebraska and, say, the Amazon rainforest, where you may be doing a set-aside. There are species that live in the Amazon that actually end up in Nebraska in terms of migratory birds. So there actually is kind of a cool connection there potentially. Our fourth imperative is human-powered living. And one of the things that we really are very focused on at the Institute is trying to create new norms and new ways of thinking about how we get around as people. There in Nebraska, there are, lots of times of the year where it's, reasonably temperate. Obviously, it gets real hot there and real cold there too. But, there are opportunities for folks to get around on foot and by bike. And also potentially by other kind of more innovative micro vehicles that maybe don't have quite the footprint that a car does, but allow folks to get around without the impact of a full tilt car, as well as transit, of course. So this imperative has an array of requirements related to it that I won't go into the details of, but it's basically things like bike parking and accessibility around the site. Just a couple of thoughts. I mean, one of the things that we've seen with living buildings is that even things like putting a big emphasis on having stairways, instead of, you think about so many buildings today, multi-story buildings, where the stairways kind of get relegated to the back corner of the building and nobody wants to use them because they're totally enclosed, they're not very nice. You can actually bring those stairs right up front, do something really beautiful with them architecturally. It's just a way to have a little bit of exercise in your day, and also you're just saving on the energy that you'd otherwise use in an elevator. Of course, this is, and bike storage, having good secure bike storage is real important. And this is actually a slide of our bike storage here at the Bullitt Center, which is where we're webcasting from. Okay, I'm going to now shift gears and talk about water. This is our next petal area. And as Kathleen was saying, this is definitely one of our more difficult and complicated petal areas. And so I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the ideas, and this will be, of course, something that we get into in more detail during our charrette on site. So just to kind of get our feet wet conceptually with things, I'm just some terminology just to make sure everybody is aware of different ways of thinking about water on site and different terms that are used. I think all of us are probably familiar with the idea of stormwater. That's a term that's used to describe rainwater that hits the site, and then it becomes kind of an issue to manage in terms of floods and how you manage that. Another water component on sites is called gray water, and when we say gray water, what we mean by that is water that after it's used is not heavily used, and it's maybe just lightly polluted. So it would be things like water that's coming out of sinks, say kitchen sinks, things like dishwasher, the water coming out of the dishwasher, wastewater coming out of the dishwasher, showers, etc. So it's kind of soapy water that has been lightly used. And then black water is water that's coming out of toilets. So I'm going to talk about each one of those as we move forward. So the imperative, and this petal, unlike some of our other petals, just has one imperative, but it's one very dense imperative. And I'm just going to read the imperative. It's that project water use and release must work in harmony with the natural water flows of the site and its surroundings. 100% of the project's water needs must be supplied by captured precipitation or other natural closed-loop water systems and or by recycling used project water, and must be purified as needed without use of chemicals. All stormwater and water discharge, including gray and black water, must be treated on site and managed either through reuse, a closed-loop system, or infiltration. Excess stormwater can be released onto adjacent sites under certain conditions. Okay, that has a lot in that, obviously, and so I just want to kind of try to distill that into three key areas that what we're trying to focus on here. And really that first sentence is really trying to get at, we essentially want the project after it's built from a hydrologic standpoint to emulate the natural state of the site. So water arriving at the site and then departing the site either through groundwater extraction or any streams, those sorts of things, is working very similarly to how the site worked before it's developed. Then the second big concept is that any water used on the site basically be received from the site. It's taking advantage of the natural beneficial presence of water on the site, either rainwater or, if you have a water right, the groundwater withdrawal. That said, groundwater withdrawal, we would want to see recharge in conjunction with that, so it emulates the natural state of the site. And then finally, that last paragraph is really about on-site sewage treatment. And so treating all the wastewater on site, including black water, and that is probably seems the most far out of all the requirements. But there's quite an interesting revolution going on right now in sewage treatment from a technological standpoint that really is quite something. And we won't go into a lot of detail here today, but at least gives you a sense of where we're headed and what the requirement is. So regarding collection strategies of how, okay, if you're on site and you're harvesting this water asset on site, what are different ways people do that? A big way people do that is rainwater harvesting, and it's pretty amazing. I was just doing some work in Normal, Illinois with the city there, and it's a very innovative city that's done a lot of sustainability planning. And I had a conversation with the public works director, and he said, if you really think about it, what seems radical is how we typically handle water today, which is these very large scale systems that's, collecting water often at long distances away, treating it and bringing it to the site, and that we're kind of giving up this really amazing asset in terms of rainwater harvesting, which is just kind of this gift that falls on the site, but we're treating more as a problem to deal with. Other things, other sources of water are ground and surface waters. Condensate in humid climates, heat pumps and air conditioners give out quite a bit of condensate. That's a potential source, maybe less so in Nebraska. And then also on-site reclaimed water, so potentially if you have gray water, maybe refiltering that and reusing it for something like landscaping. There's an array of treatment options. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that, but one thing I do want to emphasize that, like many things in the Living Building Challenge, we're in a really interesting period of innovation right now from the standpoint of technology and design know-how, and so our ability to treat things like rainwater and make them safe for drinking on a small scale is completely different than the way it was 10 or 20 years ago, and so that's really part of this water revolution that we're undergoing right now. So I'm just going to briefly, this is a bit of a complicated slide, but I'm going to give you kind of a high level of it. If you think about how we typically approach water, traditionally, if you look at the gray side, the left side of this slide, it's interesting because we have water coming to the site in the form of rainfall, but interestingly, we don't really have much interaction with that rainfall other than for it to become a problem, actually. It's we don't even call it rainwater, we call it stormwater, which is kind of ironic, I think, or interesting, the language we use for that. And so the water that's used by the site typically is coming from a larger regional plant. The project then does a single pass-through, kind of a single use, and once any of that water is touched on site, it becomes a problem. 1/3 of all water use in the United States is in toilets, which is kind of amazing. We're taking this very high quality, clean asset, and then, once it's touched, it becomes a problem. And a lot of other things that we use, kind of everything is then tainted. Everything is then kind of combined together into one pipe and then sent off to a regional treatment plant. So the Living Building Challenge takes I would say, a bit more subtle and thoughtful approach to water. And really starting off with, I think, a strong idea that, hey, if you have this asset coming to the site in terms of rainwater or potentially on-site water, please use it. You know, it's something that is available, low embodied carbon. Let's take advantage of it. And then in terms of once it's used, there's a bit more nuance in terms of let's sort of treat each one of these areas of water and see if we can reuse them in a beneficial way. For example, can gray water help irrigate a landscape, for example? And then all of that, including black water, is treated on site. So this is just an interesting project in Hawaii, kind of an unusual example, but this is a project that is using, really does a nice job at combining the architecture of the building and kind of paying attention to the natural systems on site. So the wind, prevailing wind in this location is a very foggy location in Hawaii. It's on the Big Island. So the prevailing wind comes from the left, from the north. And basically is that it kind of a lot of wind-driven fog, and so that fog collects on that metal roof section, and then it's just collected in that gutter, and then it then runs into a 10,000-gallon cistern. You can see it there below the building, and that system basically provides all the water for this classroom. This is a science classroom as part of a prep school. Okay, I'm now going to shift gears and talk about energy. You know, obviously a very important topic as we think about all the impacts of fossil fuel usage. You know, to me, the really exciting thing with, you know, everything that we're talking about with the Living Building Challenge is that, you know, we call ourselves dreamers and doers. We're really interested in thinking big about solutions to our various problems and doing it in a way that's really positive and can do. And, you know, I think one of the big issues with climate change is I think a lot of the times people are just a bit afraid. They don't feel like there's an alternative pathway to resolve how they're living in a way that doesn't have a big carbon footprint. And the good news is that there is. And net zero energy buildings, I think, is a really big part of that potentially. Okay, so let's dive into this topic. So this imperative is called net positive energy. So what this says is 105% of the project's energy needs must be supplied by on-site renewable energy on a net annual basis without the use of on-site combustion. Projects must provide energy storage for resiliency. And again, there's three requirements kind of embedded in that. But the main one is really a pretty profound one. It is basically saying that the project needs to generate as much energy as it uses over the course of the year plus 5%. And the way almost all of our projects do that is that they have a tie to the energy grid or the electrical grid. So the expectation, almost all these buildings, they're not an off-the-grid building. Almost all of our net zero or living buildings are still tied to the electric grid, but essentially they are very efficient in how they use their electricity, and then they also produce electricity through solar panels or wind or other means. And so there are times that the building is actually going to produce more energy than it uses, and at those times the meter spins backwards, and then there's times that the building will need to use energy off the grid, for example at nighttime if they're using solar panels, and then on a net basis over the course of the year they actually generate more energy than they use. Pretty neat. One thing, just kind of a little factoid that's really important is, you know, people don't really realize this. If you look at our energy use in the United States across sectors, the largest single use in the United States is building operations. So it's heating, cooling, ventilation, lighting, things plugged into the wall. Kind of very benign seeming thing, but it does really add up. And so it's really what we're targeting here. couple just conceptual things, kind of high-level thoughts. One is, we like these sort of old-timey values, and the idea that we reap the harvest. There's sun is coming to the site, rainwater is coming to the site. We're going to collect that, take advantage of it. And then there's also this idea of applying the idea of living within your means. So, you only have what you have, and you're not going to borrow, you're not going to borrow energy from other people, or, use more energy than you have. You're not going to use more water than you have. You're going to kind of take care of yourself. So there is this, I think, kind of there's some of those sorts of self-sufficiency elements in this too. A couple things about design process that are important, and we'll certainly be getting into this in much more detail in a couple of weeks. But one thing that's really important is that, or kind of a framework of approaching how to design a building from a net zero energy standpoint, is to really start off by looking at what is available on site. Like, how much energy can you actually generate on site given all the different sources? Maybe there's some wind, solar, etc. And figuring out what your kind of parameters are in terms of how much energy that can generate, and then trying to work within that in terms of the energy use on site. And to do that, you really have to take a close look at the sub-uses on the site. Really understand, how is this building going to actually use energy? Is it mostly heating? Is it cooling? Is it lighting? And it's different for every building. Although there's enough known out there that there's good information out there as well, but you have to start with that. And then really thinking about how all those systems work together. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects real briefly. One is the Bullitt Center, and that's the building we're broadcasting from, kind of a real far out looking building. But this building is a 6-story building that generates more energy than it uses, which is kind of cool. And just to give you a sense of what does this mean in terms of conservation, like how much energy did this building have to save, or how much do we have to lower our energy footprint by for it to achieve net zero energy? And to give you a sense of this building, the Bullitt Center is in gray here. So gray is, so this slide is showing the Bullitt Center if it had kind of a typical amount of energy use of just your Joe average office building in Seattle. So that black cap over the building is the size solar array the building would need if it was just an average office building. That slide shows if it was a new office building built in the Seattle code. That's if it was built to the LEED system, which is a well-known green building system using all of the energy points under that system. And then that's actually what the building is using. So it tells you a couple of things. One is, we really can actually push conservation very, very far. And that we have a lot of really great technologies available to us. And it also just shows you just how important the conservation aspect is relative to achieving net zero energy. So just looking at this a different way, there's a term called EUI, which means energy use intensity. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that's basically like miles per gallon for cars, but it's more of a number for buildings. So lower is better. So if you look at all buildings across the United States, the average building has an EUI of 92. The Bullitt Center here has an EUI of 13. So really got very aggressive with changing energy efficiency or reducing the energy use. Just a couple of things. This slide shows you how, I was talking about the building being tied to the energy grid, the electrical grid, and providing a surplus during the summer and pulling energy off the grid in the winter, and this slide represents that. Just briefly, this is another project. We'll talk more about this when we're down there, but Z-Home project is a residential project, a 10-unit townhome development that's also achieving net zero energy. We also have this other project, a Walgreens in Evanston, Illinois, that's pursuing net zero also. One thing that I want to highlight is that energy, you look at this stuff and you think, wow, that seems kind of expensive. And it is more expensive. There's no doubt about that, that capital costs up front are higher. But if you look at total cost of ownership, particularly with schools, if you think about doing maybe a 20-year bond, often these systems pay off within the term of the bond. And if you look at both the combination, if you look at total cash flow in terms of savings on energy versus the increase in your bond costs, often it's a net positive in terms of financial. So it's don't assume that this isn't something that is affordable. It just makes you look at the math in a more complete way. Okay, our next petal area, our fourth petal area, is health and happiness. And I just am going to highlight the three imperatives in this petal. There's three of those, so just talk about those briefly. So the first is civilized environment, and it's very straightforward. It's that every occupied space have access to openable windows as well as daylight. And an interesting thing that we found, and we have some slides in here that are specific to education, is that students just do better when they're exposed to daylight, and that's not really that surprising, but there are actual studies out there that demonstrate that. So it's a feel-good thing, but it's also just kind of a hard-headed, pragmatic thing that students do better and perform better, as do office workers in well-daylit offices. Our next imperative is healthy interior environment. It covers an array of topics, all the way from making sure you have adequate exhaust systems to having good track-off systems at building entrances, cleaning protocols, etc. And similarly, those are also better for learning. It's not surprising that if you have healthy, fresh air inside, that students perform better. And that's not just, that's actually based on statistical data. It's interesting, one element of the healthy interior environments is making sure that carbon dioxide levels don't get too high within classroom spaces. And it's a very significant issue. Typically, it's been found that when CO2 rises above about 800 parts per million, it does start to affect your brain. You literally start to go to sleep. And there's a really interesting set of studies that was done in Washington State, and they found classrooms that had CO2 levels as high as 5,000, so more than 5 times the amount, the threshold where performance and learning starts to diminish. So again, these are not complicated things to fix and really important. So the next imperative is BioPhillip Environment. And this is kind of a fancy set of words for making sure that buildings and our places are designed in a way to really connect us with nature. The whole idea around this is that as humans, we have an innate love of nature, and that we connect with it, and it makes us feel better, and it actually it makes places feel better, and we perform better in environments that are like that. So the BioPhillip hypothesis is that there's this instinctive bond between human beings and other living systems that is really, that's been, part of who we are. And it's interesting, as we've become more urban or more kind of human-centered, sometimes we've lost connection with that. And so there's just a whole array of things that can be done to help reconnect us with nature, even in interior environments. So it's really about that. There's a whole array of biophilic design elements, and I'm not going to do a deep dive on these. If you're interested in this, there's a great writer named Steve Keller, and you can check out his books. But it just runs all over the place. It can be things like, what's the history of this place? How is that expressed here? What's the ecology of this place? To things as basic as, do I have a feeling of air movement across me that's maybe a little bit like wind? Do I get fresh air? What's the interplay of light across the space in terms of natural daylight and kind of rhythms of the day? If you're back in a cubicle cluster and you don't see, the light you're getting is just 100% consistent light through the course of the day, that's not very natural. That's not how we're used to experiencing natural light, for example. So this is just a nice example of a building down in Texas that's a Living Building Challenge project that's just coming in right now for certification. It's just an interesting example of some of this biophilic concept of indoor-outdoor spaces that take advantage of shoulder temperatures, windows, and spaces that open up and connect really well with nature. And I'm just even looking at this gutter system, thinking about thunderstorms in Texas and how the water might run down this and make noise that really helps you connect with the weather that's going on. Okay, I'm going to hand things back to Kathleen.
Great, thank you, Brad. So we've got 3 more petals that we're going to go through and then just have some closing slides and an opportunity for you all to ask questions. So the next petal is called the materials petal, and it's another one of our tough petals with water and energy. And it's really an important petal, though. What we realize is that the materials that we use to build our buildings have a really profound impact on the environment, but also on our health. And so the 5 different imperatives in this address distinct aspects of how materials impact us and impact the environment. So the first imperative is called the red list. And it really is a list of 22 different chemicals which are known to cause detrimental impacts to human health on a variety of levels, but significant human health issues. And so these are sort of the worst in-class chemicals in terms of their impact on human health, but also the chemicals that are prevalent in building materials. So there's other chemicals that we want to avoid as well, but they aren't necessarily prevalent in building materials. So this is sort of the short list of, if we at all possible can avoid having these chemicals be a part of the building materials and building products that we put in the building, we are going to have a much healthier building. It's going to be healthier for the construction workers building the building. It's going to be healthier for the manufacturers of products and building materials going into the building. So, I mean, it has a very significant health impact for the user of the building and the people making the buildings, as well as the communities around them. So this list of 22 chemicals really translates into, these are kind of classes of chemicals, so it really translates into 777 distinct different chemicals that we are trying to avoid in the building materials and building products that we're using. So this may seem overwhelming, but projects are achieving this through advocacy, through close collaboration with manufacturers, through sharing of information across design teams. We have a whole database available of compliant products called the Declare database. So there's a lot of information out there and a lot of work happening, not just from our institute, but others as well, looking at healthy building materials. So the second materials imperative is called Embodied Carbon Footprint. And the idea here is that, Brad referred to energy, right? And there's the whole energy petal talking about net positive energy that really looks at the operational energy use of the building. So how much energy is the building using, during its life, during its use? So how much for heating, how much for cooling, how much for lighting, how much for plug loads? But what this imperative is getting at is how much energy is represented by and embodied in the building materials that are used on the project. So every building material has some amount of embodied energy, and that includes the energy that went into extracting the raw resources, that went into manufacturing the material, that went into transporting that material to the building site. So it's all that energy that we call the embodied energy. And the idea of this imperative is that you do a calculation to determine how much embodied energy is in the building materials, and then you buy offsets to sort of offset that amount of carbon through renewable energy. And so this series of pie charts is really kind of an interesting one, because what you realize is that as buildings become more and more efficient in their operation phase, right? So as we get closer and closer to net zero buildings and net positive energy buildings, the amount of embodied energy percentage-wise that that building represents becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that's what we're trying to address with this imperative. The third materials imperative is called responsible industry. And this is really looking at what are the impacts to the environment of resource extraction. And it's looking at many of the sort of big materials like stone, rock, metal, minerals, and timber. And it is requiring that you use materials that are third-party certified to be sustainably harvested. The problem is that the timber industry is the only one right now that has this independent third-party verification system, which is called the Forest Stewardship Council certification system. The stone industry has actually just published a draft of a third-party verification system, so they're sort of getting on board. But the requirement here is that all the wood is either salvaged, meaning it was used before, like maybe in an old barn, pulled out and being reused in your building, or that it's FSC certified. And then you're also doing advocacy with the other materials industries to encourage them to do a third-party verification system as well. So this is just an example of, why FSC certified wood is so important. Basically, this certification system looks at the long-term social, economic, and environmental health associated with the forest, so that people that are working as loggers will have, steady jobs through their lifetime and on through the generation, so that the forests are being sustained, for the sake of the forest and the species that live in that, but also for economic vitality and the health of the communities that depend upon forestry. So this is an example of a net zero energy house that is in Austin, Texas, which also did a lot around materials. And you see here some examples of some salvaged wood that was used within the project, in the floors and in the stairs. So the next imperative under materials is called living economy sourcing. And this gets a little bit at some of the concepts that we talked about with urban agriculture. But now it's talking about materiality. And it's asking the question of, where do our materials come from? Do they represent a sort of regional focus, something that's culturally significant, that may be tied to our history, and is place-based, but also, what's the energy associated with getting the materials there, right? So the closer that a material is extracted and manufactured to the site, then less embodied energy is represented in that material through transportation to the site. So the requirements here are they're kind of cost-based, and they're looking at how much are you spending on building materials and making sure that 20% of that is coming from a very close radius around your site, 311 miles. And then the next 30% is coming from the 621-mile radius. And then the rest can come from an even kind of wider radius. And so here we have Hastings, Nebraska as the epicenter, and you can see kind of what that means. So you're really looking at a focus on local materials to support local economies and also have that benefit from an environmental standpoint. The last imperative under materials is called net positive waste. And this is really looking at the entire life of a building, from the design through construction, operation, and end of life, and looking at how can we minimize the amount of material waste from that building in terms of the amount of waste that would be potentially going to a landfill, and how can we divert that. So it's asking project teams to look at how do we design in a way that eliminates excess materials. How do we build in a way that eliminates excess materials and that also diverts the waste that is inevitable from construction projects away from the landfill to using it again, or recycling, salvaging. In the operation phase, it's about recycling materials that the occupants generate. It's about composting food scraps. And at the end of life, it's thinking about how can I design in a way that my building could be either repurposed for another use, or that it can be deconstructed and the materials can be reused to create another building that's needed. So it's really looking at that whole life cycle of the building and how we reduce waste within that life cycle. So the next petal is called the equity petal, and this one is really kind of unique and special to the Living Building Challenge program. The Living Building Challenge program is really the first green building certification program that takes on these concepts of equity, of inclusion, of social justice and environmental justice, and really starts to try to address, well, what does that mean? How do we create buildings for all people? How do we create an environment that everybody benefits from equally, so that these concepts aren't just for buildings, for rich people, but they're buildings for everybody. And so some of the imperatives around this, there's 4 different ones, start to address some of these issues. This one is called human scale and humane places. And there's a lot of different kind of prescriptive requirements here around street design, around signage, around parking design. But the basic concept is very simple, and that's that we're designing places for people and not places for cars or industry. So a lot of our cities, our suburbs, our communities have started to be designed more for the car and how we get around by car. But this is sort of saying, okay, no, our buildings are for people. And yes, we may still need cars, but how do we design so that they're lively, enriching, healthy places for all people? And that's kind of the basic framework of this imperative. The next one has to do with universal access to nature and place. So this is kind of building on those concepts of designing for people and really broadening it to all people. And so that you may create in an urban setting, you may pull your building back from the property line and create a plaza that's open to the public, create an art installation, or in this case, a life-size checkers game that can be played by anybody, passing by the building. But it's also about making sure that everybody has access to fresh air, to sunlight, and to natural waterways, so that your building isn't polluting the air of your neighbors. It's not blocking the sunlight from entering neighboring buildings or impeding their ability to generate their own electricity on site. That if you're near a pond or a lake or a river or an ocean, that you're making sure that you're not taking that for yourself, but that you're giving access to it for everybody to enjoy that natural feature. And then the next imperative is called equitable investment. And this is really sort of a direct answer to the giving back. Nonprofits are exempt from this requirement, but all others need to comply. And the basic idea is that for every dollar of total project cost, the development has to set aside and donate half a cent or more, so half a cent or more per dollar, towards some sort of charitable organization, so that and we have an exchange program that we developed around this where projects can donate to our exchange program. We use that money to help projects that are in low-income communities or perhaps don't have the financial resources to purchase renewable energy technologies themselves, to make sure that they have access to those same strategies and technologies. The next one is called just organizations. And the requirement here is that at least one of the major players on a team. So it might be the architect, it might be the engineer, it might be the owner or the contractor, landscape architect, but somebody involved in the creation of the building has gone through this process of getting a just label. And the just label is really this nutrition label or transparency label for businesses. And it's a way for businesses to show that they have really thought about their human relations, their HR practices, and they're operating in a way that is fair, that is just, that is equitable, that takes into account diversity goals, that takes into account sort of equal pay. So these are the 6 different categories that are covered under this label, dealing with things as diverse as, safety, stewardship, worker benefit, diversity. And so the very last petal is called beauty. And this one is also, sort of special to our program. It's got 2 distinct imperatives that are a part of it. And the idea here is that a living building should be one that inspires people, that inspires them to take some of these concepts and principles and apply them in their own lives, in whatever fashion that may be, in their homes or their schools and their communities. It inspires them to care and to connect, and that it also touches them, in sort of a deep place. I mean, we all know when we walk into a space that is beautiful, that touches us, kind of in our hearts. And ideally, those are really the kinds of places that get preserved, that get protected, that get, repurposed over time. So if you think about, the grand old buildings of early American days, or these cathedrals in Europe that have been around for literally hundreds and hundreds of years. These are places that are beautiful and that touch people and that people want to preserve. And really that's a core aspect of sustainability when it comes right down to it is, if the longer a building is around, the better use of those resources and energy that went into that building. So we have an imperative that's directly around beauty. Now, there's a great expression that's beauty is in the eye of the beholders, and we definitely believe that. We do not want to be arbiters of beauty, and to be designating that this building is beautiful, this building is not beautiful. So the requirements here are around actually showing that the people that use your building think it's beautiful. So you're providing a narrative from the design team, a narrative from the owner, and surveys from the users of the building that actually show this building works for those people, for that culture, for that use, and it's meaningful to those people. So that's kind of how this imperative works. And the next one is really directly about providing those opportunities for inspiration and education. A lot of our philosophy of change here at the Institute, because we acknowledge we're not going to be able to touch every building in every city, in every state, in every country. But what we want to do is help these catalyst buildings get built, these buildings that people are going to talk about, they're going to visit, they're going to be inspired by, and it's sort of planting those seeds in them that they take then and cultivate in their own communities. So living buildings also need to be directly educational through signage, through brochures, through a website, through tours of the building, et cetera, so that people understand what went into making this building real. What did it take in the design process, the construction process, what does it take to operate, so that they can learn from it and replicate it or portions of it in their own communities. So those are all the imperatives and all the petals. And we just wanted to close by showing you a few additional images from case studies that are in your general area. So this is the Berea College Deep Green Student Residence, which is a Petal certified project, and it's in Berea, Kentucky. Beautiful student dorm. This is a net zero energy house, which is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it is our oldest Living Building Challenge project. It's a historic home from over 120 years ago that's been renovated and retrofitted to operate as net zero energy. This is the interior of it, just a beautiful space. This is the Indian Creek Nature Center, which is not yet built. It's going to start construction, I think, early next year. It is pursuing full Living Building Challenge certification. It's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it's a nature center, essentially, that's in the Iowa prairie. They have 290 acres that they are restoring and preserving native prairie lands. This is the Tyson Living Learning Center. This was one of our very first certified projects down in Eureka, Missouri, full living certification. So it's net zero energy, net zero water, it uses healthy materials, and all the different criteria that we just discussed. So we have a lot of resources that are available to project teams and to people who want to learn more about these concepts or want to implement them in work that they're doing. So some of these resources are the standard itself, which talks about the intent and requirements of the petals and the imperatives and how certification works. We also have what we call petal handbooks, which go into much more detail about each of these 7 different petals and how to go about achieving the requirements. We also publish a lot of books. So along that mission and imperative of being educational, we are helping project teams and owners tell the story of their buildings so others can learn from them. So these are just some of the books that we publish through Ecotone Publishing. We also have a quarterly newsletter that's available on our, or quarterly magazine, I should say, that's available for download on our website that covers a whole variety of topics and interviews with inspirational people, project stories, things like that. We also have what we call an ambassador network, and this is a group of individuals that have been specially educated and trained by the Institute to be ambassadors in their own communities, to spread the word about these concepts and principles, to educate others about the Living Building Challenge. We actually have one ambassador in Nebraska, and in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we are hoping that from this we will inspire some of you to pursue that as well. We are on all the latest social media. I can't say that I personally am on it all, but our institute is. So if you want to follow us that way. We also have a lot of upcoming education. You can get information about other webinar series and live workshops and conferences that we're speaking at, all available on our website. We also ourselves host 3 different conferences a year. The next one is called, it's Net Positive. It's always in February-ish. This year it's in California and San Diego, and it is specifically focused on net positive energy, net positive water issues. And then our biggest conference of the year is normally held in the Northwest, and it's called Living Future. This coming year in May is going to be our 10th anniversary of the Living Future Conference, and the focus is on truth and transparency. And then also we will be coming to you live in Nebraska in a couple of weeks, Brad and I both, to lead 2 full days of sort of educational workshops / charrettes that are really focused on starting to apply some of these principles and concepts to a real project on the Hastings campus. And the first day is going to be focused on kind of delving into the story of place and, meaning Hastings, Nebraska, and your community of students and faculty and, others, and doing a really deep dive into all these aspects of the Living Building Challenge and walking away with really big picture ideas and goal setting around what this project is going to accomplish. And then the second day, we're going to dive into specific design strategies and really understand the performance and documentation requirements. So Brad and I are both very excited about this. And now we would like to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Kathleen, very, very much. Great presentation. So viewers, to get your questions to Kathleen or Brad, you have 3 options. You can chat them into the WebEx chat box. You can send them by Twitter, hashtag SLPS Thursday, or you can give them to your host, your extended learning services or other host, room host, and they will put them in the chat box for you. And Kathleen and Brad, it always takes a few minutes to get questions going because it's coming in with fingers. So just hang on a minute, get your, take a moment to breathe, and we'll read them to you as they come in.
We're ready.
Okay, so we have one saying, in Nebraska, are the public utilities required to buy excess power generated at business entities?
I'm going to speak in generalities, and that's a very good question. So there is a federal law that requires utilities to buy back power. It was a law passed in about 2003, and it really actually was a law that made these net zero energy buildings the way that they're being built now possible. Mm-hmm. It's a very important law. However, that doesn't mean that it's just kind of a free-for-all out there. Each utility can put specific parameters on how that occurs. So there may be buyback provisions, those sorts of things in terms of what they will pay for the power, et cetera. But I don't know, I don't know those details locally, and that's a really good question that is something that would be good to follow up on as we discuss things in Hastings.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next question is do you have the materials compliance list available online?
Yes, we do. So on this slide right now that's up, www.living-future.org. If you go to that website, we have a resources section which includes the list of, two things. It includes the list of chemicals which you're trying to avoid, the 22 plus the kind of 777 specific chemical names. But we also have the program called Declare, which looks at, which is that database of material, and that is freely accessible online. And you can go to declare.org. It has its own website, or you can go to the livingfuture.org website and follow the link to the Declare program.
Okay, next in the lineup is how do these types of buildings stand up to the times of drought?
I'm happy to take that one. It's a great question. And, I think on a meta level, what they're intended to do is really try to ameliorate those sorts of concerns. If you think about, let's take Nebraska. Nebraska's sitting on the Ogallala Aquifer. I'm sure you all know it much better than I do. But that aquifer is basically fossil water that's left over from the last ice age, and it's really the way I think about it, it's kind of a resource that's there, maybe to really help supplement rather than be 100% resource. And yet I think, and hopefully this isn't too controversial, the way it's being used right now, it's being drawn down, and it's going to disappear at some point, potentially this century. And so, I think that net zero water strategies are actually a way to use less of that precious resource that's available really in times of drought as sort of a backup. It's what we've been using, regardless of whether we really need it at a given time or not. I do think there's something, part of that question really speaks to this notion of resilience, and that's kind of the everybody's favorite word right now, but it's an important one. And so the idea that you would have a building that's actually collecting rainwater and has a source that's there for taking care of needs, it's really a secondary system to help back up the primary system that's already there.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when you're actually getting into the nitty-gritty of designing these buildings, you're looking at a sort of historical weather data and the rainfall patterns so that you're not designing your water system for the year with the most rain, right? You're designing it really for the years with the sort of lesser amounts of rain so that you've got a built-in buffer against those times of drought.
Thank you, Brad and Kathleen. Our next question is, how many living building certified buildings are there worldwide?
Great question. So you saw from that slide that we showed earlier that we've got roughly 300 registered projects right now, which means that those projects are somewhere in the state of, design, construction, occupancy phase. We have 26 certified projects right now, and several that are actually in the process of certification with us. So I would expect in the next month, 2 months, we'll see that number increase by somewhere between 5 and 7.
Okay, thank you. Next in the lineup, what are some ways clients have educated their communities about their living buildings in regards to inspiration and education?
Great question. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people have done it. Often these buildings do have some kind of signage at the buildings themselves, so that just as people are interfacing with the building, so if you can imagine it being a somewhat public building, like if it's a school building, on a campus or something like that, or an office building, that there's signage in place that as people come to the building and move through the building, they're learning about some of these special features. Projects very often, too, have open days and give tours. Like here at the Bullitt Center, there are tours multiple times a week and special events that happen so that people can come and, see and feel and touch and experience what a living building looks like. They have educational websites. They have brochures. They give talks in their community and, share that kind of information. So those are some of the ways that people do it. And Brad actually, before he came to the Institute, worked on the Z Home, and they had a great educational campaign.
So I just showed that one slide. So before I joined the Institute, I actually developed one of the certified projects, the Z Home project, and that was really conceptualized as trying to be a catalytic inspirational project within the Seattle area. It actually preceded the Bullitt Center, and we did a heck of a lot of stuff with it. We had lots of classes with more technical audiences. We had about 5,000 people attend those classes. We actually had the building open for 9 weekends in a row and had a whole big media campaign around it on local radio stations. And during that process, we actually had 10,000 people visit the project, which, considering it was a townhome project, it's not, otherwise that interesting. But, we had people from all over the state, actually Oregon. We had, people show up. They're like, I just drove 5 hours to get here. Mm-hmm. So, these very exciting. People love this stuff, and they love kind of the can-do aspect of it. So I think, the idea that you all are looking to do something similar is great. And I think asking that question is really important because it helps you think ahead towards, well, what are we doing as a whole with this whole thing? Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, and we have at least 4 more questions in the lineup, so rapid fire here. Can you address how you have seen your principles incorporated in the tiny house movement?
Good question.
Yeah, well, I don't think we have any actually certified tiny homes. But it is actually embedded into one of the imperatives about limits on the size of single-family homes, really kind of acknowledging that it's perhaps an oxymoron to have like a super large sustainable home that, if you drastically increase the square footage, you're kind of using too many resources, for a single person or for a single family. But I do think like in the tiny home movement, I mean, you really are thinking about, with that, you're thinking about your footprint, right? How much resource are you using? Not only to build your home, and the land footprint that it's on and the materials that go into it, but how much water, how much energy, is needed to operate that home, and, really trying to minimize that and live lighter on the land. And I think all of those principles are very consistent with the Living Building Challenge and what we're talking about.
Okay, next, and actually I'm just going to take a quick moment. All sites, if you do have questions, there is still time, but please get them in right away. You can get them in through Twitter, the chat box, or give them to your room host. This is your last call to get those in within the next couple minutes. Okay, so the next question is, what is the benefit of becoming certified through the Living Building Challenge instead of just being one without certification?
I'll take that one
Sure.
on, because it was interesting. G-Home, we actually kind of joined into the Living Building Challenge a little bit late, and so I was able to kind of see the benefits of it. And I think of them as twofold, and I'm sure Kathleen may have more to add, but one is that I think going through a certification system, particularly one that, as Kathleen was talking about, is performance-based. It's actually like, did you actually perform? It really, it keeps everybody's nose to the grindstone. And, sometimes you think you're going to have total control over everything that's happening on the project, your design team, et cetera. But sometimes having that kind of external target where it's like, not only do I have to reckon with, the owner or the project goals, but there's this, we also have to achieve this third-party certification, and it's going to be an extra look. Kind of keeps everybody maybe a little more focused than they would otherwise. And I also think the performance orientation that's based on actual performance really makes sure that even the occupants are bought into that. And I think having, again, an extra having that outside party helps with that. I think the other really big thing is we're really, the Institute, this is going back to almost Kathleen's first slide, we're really about a movement. We're about kind of wrapping our arms around as a group all these really leading edge projects worldwide and kind of helping amplify what everybody's doing worldwide. So, like you're hearing about projects right now that have happened that are hopefully inspiring to you. If they weren't in our process, and our process involves case studies, really understanding what the project story was. Right now I'm working on a net zero energy book that's just case studies on our 15 net zero energy certified projects. Putting that kind of resource together allows you to be part of this bigger narrative. So it's kind of getting some credit, but then it's also being, again, part of this
right, contributing something to the larger movement.
Yeah.
And I have to say, just to kind of emphasize Brad's point, prior to coming to the Institute, over the course of my career, I've worked on a lot of different kinds of green building certification programs and had the opportunity to actually kind of retroactively audit some buildings that were built to the green building standards, but not actually certified, but then after the fact going in and seeing, okay, did they meet their targets and their goals? And I have to say, every single project that we looked at, the answer was no, right? So because and really, I think if they had gone through the documentation process and the certification process, they would have met their goals. But because they didn't apply that level of rigor to meeting their goals and showing that they'd met their goals, they didn't actually meet them. They fell short. And so, you kind of feel like, well, as a owner, right, you're hiring a design team to create a building that meets certain parameters, that meets certain requirements, and you're not getting what you paid for. I mean, just plain and simple, right, in the end. And the community, the users of the building aren't getting what they anticipated that they would get. And so it's a way of really making sure that you're meeting the targets that you want to meet.
At Central Community College, we can definitely relate to that because we are an educational institution, and it would be like our students asking if they could just say that they've learned this content without testing out. And, I'm sure a few students would love to ask that question, but we like to know that our students have achieved what we say they have achieved. And so great answers. We have a couple more questions, and we're going to go right through those real quick. So what are the incentives to going through this program and the different petal certifications? And if you can keep it brief, just so we can stay on time.
I'm not sure what they mean by incentives, like what's the benefit that comes from it. I mean, if it's benefits, we kind of just spoke to it. If you're actually talking about like financial incentives, there are various programs available through local utility companies, through the federal government that help subsidize and pay for, some of the energy upgrades, some of the water upgrades, some of the renewable energy systems, for example. And there are some federal programs, and then others are very specifically local, regional, and that's something that we'll be looking into with regards to the Hastings campus of what's available in your area.
Okay, how do you explain that the Ogallala aquifer has been rising and falling over the years and decades for the past 80 years that I know of?
I knew somebody was going to know more about this. I knew it. It's like, okay, I'm going to apply my generalist knowledge. That's dangerous. All I know, I recently, I just based on my just environmental policy, I know a little bit about water, and just my generalized understanding is that it is in a depletion mode, but I'm also not an expert at it, and I suspect there's probably a few experts on this webinar. But I'd be very happy to be educated about that when I'm here. But I guess I would lay it down a little bit, like if you look at the whole aquifer, what's going on with it? Because I have seen maps that are put out by the government that sure seem to indicate that it is getting smaller. So.
And right with that was our last question. I mean, could that have been more perfect? We have a couple closing remarks, and I'm going to make those. I'm going to pull up our screen sharing. I'm going to take away your screen sharing privileges just for 1 second here.
And if I can just add, Minetta, I mean, if there are additional questions that come up for people as they think about this and ponder, what they heard today, we are happy to address those questions.
Okay, great. How would they would contact you through your email?
Yeah.
And your contact is on the website that you had up.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple closing remarks. As Kathleen and Brad referenced in the presentation, CCC is embarking on a very exciting project, our very own LBC Net Zero Energy House, as a learning and professional development project for our students, employees, and any interested public members. We are opening the design experience up to all. It will be hosted on the CCC Hastings campus on October 12th and 13th, as they noted. There is no cost to attend. We invite and encourage you to attend and learn from the best in sustainable design. We're very excited to have Kathleen and Brad come and visit with us in person and help us learn more about this. With that, there's a lot more information for you available at www.cccneb.edu/LBC. Couple of last closing remarks. We always try to report out our attendance numbers at the end just so people have an idea of viewership. Our numbers are never confirmed to their perfectness, but we have 126 in our record right now, so plus or minus 126 viewers. That's outstanding. Thank you everybody for being here. If you are a college employee, I would like to remind you it's very important you take time to register with the EMPD, register for the EMPD session. It really helps us track numbers. We have a regional partnership and we like to keep those updated. Our next presentation is going to be from MCC in November. We have our themes outlined just for you to take note of. Business entrepreneurship and enterprise, followed in December by policy, agriculture and food systems by Jocelyn. In February, Central will tackle personal and community health in March. And we'll close out with our new partner from UNL Environmental Studies, and they're going to go after natural sciences and systems and how it relates to these topics of environmental sustainability. And with that, Thank you, everybody. Happy Thursday. Have a good day.
Thank you.